working with companies who were struggling with morale changes after big layoffs. So I would get brought in to work with the leaders and the team that remained after 10, 20, 30% of the workforce had been dismissed. And at the time, I'm sure I used the word loss. I know I didn't use the word grief, but of course, that's what folks were dealing with, right? Not only the sadness over losing their colleagues and not seeing them anymore, but the worry about what was happening to their friends who had mortgages and kids in college, and their own fear about the workplace no longer feeling safe in the same way. So fast forward into the mid 2000s, and as John mentioned, our son Jimmy was diagnosed with brain cancer in 2006. 8 years later, he passed away from that. And during those 8 years, I moved in and out of my consulting practice, working more or less depending on what was happening with Jimmy. And there were times when work was a real haven for me where I could get away from what was happening. It was a distraction. And at times when Jimmy was doing well, it was also a place where I could bring Jimmy to work, if you will, and talk about him and how he was doing. After he died, I took a bit of time off work and I relaunched my consulting practice. At the same time, I started the website and the online community that John mentioned called Saltwater. And at the time, I saw the two things as very, very separate. The grief and loss work that I was doing was really purely, if you will, around grief and loss. It was people who had lost loved ones to a whole variety of different, in a whole variety of different ways. And my work was my work. But at some point, people that I was working with started to share their own losses with me because I post and I write about my own experiences and I speak about grief and loss as well. And so what I realized was that my clients had also had their own experiences, having to go back to work, having to stay at work, having to lead through grief and loss. And at the same time, the people that I was meeting through Saltwater began disclosing their experience as well. So what started off as kind of informal conversations about their experiences, or even working with a client who was struggling with it, became more organized conversations, became interviews, and eventually became the book that I wrote. Now, much like the way that I got to this work being something I didn't recognize at the time, the same thing is true with what became the seed of that book. And that was my connection and meeting of Tim Moye. I read about Tim somewhere online and read about Wrenched Hearts. And then I did this massive Google search and couldn't find very much at all, not being able to access information within Delta. And so one dark, rainy afternoon in the fall, I picked up the phone and I called Delta headquarters and I asked for Tim. And amazingly enough, they put me through and Tim picked up the phone. And after he got over the shock of this woman he'd never heard of before calling to ask about Wrenched Hearts, we had this really amazing hour-long conversation where Tim told me about his work. And while I didn't know it at the time, it was the conversation that inspired me to really move fully into work around grief and loss. And so with that, Tim, I'm not going to say anything else about what you do other than I'm just so grateful that I made that phone call and you were there to take the call and willing to talk to me.
Thanks, Margo. And to be honest with you, that was a big shift for me as well. Getting this random phone call from someone I didn't know from another, state in the U.S. So let me kind of tell you guys about how I got started, how all of this kind of transformed, life for hundreds of people. Back in 2011, my youngest son, who's 25 years old at the time, his name is Jason, he passed away unexpectedly. He was due to come home from his job out in Utah, and I live in Georgia, which is a long way away. And all of a sudden, as though you flicked a light switch, life changed. They had found him deceased, and I got the phone call that no parent ever wants to get. And I didn't know what to do. And most people in the workforce, you don't know what to do. My first phone call was actually to my boss at the time and said, "Hey, my son passed away. I don't know what's going on. I'll let you know." And unlike most companies, the response was, "Take all the time you need. Let us know what you need. We'll take care of you." And they did. So I took probably 2 weeks out of work. And just so you guys know, I started Delta as a mechanic. I was a lead mechanic. I was an analyst. I was an engineer. I did all these things that were supporting aircraft maintenance. So I was a fixer. That's what I did. I fixed things, and I finally found something I couldn't fix. So I took about 2 weeks out of work. And honestly, the only reason I went back to work was this idleness that I didn't know what to do with. What I found out when I got back in the workforce was that life was still going on for everybody else. And for me, it had kind of taken this pause. I didn't understand why I was sitting in meetings talking about aircraft parts when I'd lost my son. So, I navigated probably a year or so of just dark, depressed, not knowing what to do with myself. And then I met another mechanic on the hangar floor who had lost his 18-year-old son about 4 months after I lost Jason. And we connected. We told each other our stories of our kids, of our loss. And I think it's even in Margo's book. He and I, we got off into this old place and we were sharing our stories and we were crying and hugging on each other. And as you can imagine, a bunch of mechanics walking around, this was not normal. They gave us wide berth. They did not want to be anywhere near what was going on. But what I found was this healing moment. Someone got me and I got them. And that's what gave me this idea. If he and I experience what we experienced, there must be others within this, 10,000 employees at Delta Technical Operations who had a similar situation or a similar need. So I just approached my senior leadership and said, "Hey, I want to start a group for parents who've lost children." And because it's such an uncomfortable subject, I think they said, "Okay, sure. What do you need?" And I said, "Well, I just need permission and I need space." So Delta was very open to giving us, an hour a month and a meeting space that's safe and private. And our first meeting, we had 10 people show up. And I really didn't know what we were going to do. It was kind of like an awkward first date, if you will. And we just began telling each other our journeys, our story. Why are we here today? Because obviously we'd all lost someone. We'd all lost a child. And as parents, you are the protector of those children for their life. So all of our blueprints changed, right? That first meeting was very successful. We talked, we laid down some ground rules. Our ground rules were, this is a free tier zone, not a tier-free zone. And hugs are mandatory. And if you don't want to get hugged, you better tell somebody, because when you're telling stories that are so impactful and so emotional, people want to engage. People want to help you through it, if you will. After our first meeting, we met for about a year in tech ops, and we went from 10 people to almost 40 people that were coming to this monthly meeting. And what we found was being in a group of people who understood, who got where we were, there was some connection, some healing that began to happen. And what I found for me personally, helping other people helped me heal. So at the urging of my boss at the time, he said, "You should take this to the whole company." So I approached our executive vice president of HR and said, "Hey, this is what we're doing at Tech Ops. I'd like to take it to the company." And he was very open to it. So we took it to the company. And our first meeting, we called it a fly-in because people flew in, as an airline, you have flight benefits. People flew into Atlanta and we had this first meeting and there were 50 people that flew in. Today, there's probably 300 to 400 members of Wrenched Hearts. They meet in different cities across the company. And thousands of people are being helped because someone said, we've got to do something. And companies just don't do that.
Yeah. No, and I think that's one of the things, Tim, that from the beginning really struck me and has continued to just impress me about Delta. I think it's so unusual for a company to do what they did, right? And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about why do you think that your corporate leadership embraced this idea of allowing Wrenched Hearts to become a corporate-wide program? And why do you think you were successful in convincing them that this was a good idea?
So one of Delta's mantras, if you will, is they always were the Delta family. They took care of employees. They took care of each other, right? And
Mhm.
this really just kind of folds into that. And when I first approached HR about taking it to the whole company, one of our vice presidents of HR told me this couldn't be something that started in HR. It couldn't be a company created event. It had to be grassroots. That's the only way it was going to be successful. And Delta embraced that. Delta said, yes, we're going to give you the resources that you need. I think also that the company saw the value of valuing people who are bringing something to work every day that they just can't carry. When you have a huge loss, like a child, even a parent, a spouse, a sibling, you bring that with you to work every day. And just in the US, billions of dollars are lost by companies every year through grief, right? People, absenteeism, mistake making, things like that. And I think the company saw that if we could address that loss in a compassionate, empathetic way, then it cost Delta really nothing, but the benefits were huge. And you created employees who were much more loyal to a company that cared about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's interesting because as you and I've talked a lot about, right? It all comes down to the humans that are involved in this and doing this work. And there's a lot of talk these days about apps and, bereavement leave, all of which is important and has its place. But there is no substitute for that connection with other people who understand, right? And I wonder if you can share too a bit more about why you think this Wrenched Hearts model is so powerful and so meaningful for the folks who get involved with it.
Oh yeah, it's that shared experience, right? You can't bring people together who have different circumstances and expect there to be the connection that there is with people who have the same experience, the same grief, the same loss. And Wrenched Hearts absolutely filled that. It told people that it's okay for you to come to work and say, I'm sad. It's okay for you to come to work and say, I can't focus. And it's okay to cry together, to hug one another. And Margo, I'm glad you brought it up. A lot of companies are going to app-based um, emotional health and well-being. I think there's nothing that is more powerful than the power of the human touch, the human connection. Even this meeting, right? Imagine the emotions that would be different if we were all sitting in the same room and you were hearing our stories of our loss. I think that's part of the success. Um, and with that, that kind of takes us into Margo. How can we make our workplaces more grief literate, even in the face of resistance, right? Where maybe companies aren't as open to it as Delta was.
So it's a big question you ask, my friend, because I think, like you do, that this is all about the humans in the organization. And we oftentimes gravitate towards the easier fix, right? The buying the app, the offering the online resources, the EAP, the bereavement leave, all those things, which again, as I said earlier, have a place. But the reality is that we all work for managers when we're in organizations, and we all have colleagues, whether we're part of a team or a small business or a nonprofit. And if those people that we work with have not experienced some sort of life-altering loss, it doesn't even have to be a death. It can be a diagnosis, it can be a divorce, but something that has really shifted their life on its axis. It's very difficult to support someone else who's going through something like that. And so it takes, I think, in an organization, it takes some folks who have some experience with that and some understanding of that in order to bring in the kind of resources and groups and support that you've talked about, Tim, right? There has to be some openness to that. Otherwise, they're going to gravitate to the away from me kind of solutions, which are just offer them these tools and we'll be good, right? So I think it really begins with the leadership of the organization and the frontline managers and their willingness to get some coaching and training and to learn about what they don't know. One of the things that really struck me in starting Saltwater, and that has only grown over time, is when I lost Jimmy and I started writing about grief and loss and reaching out and talking to people, I really thought, I will confess that I was going to be one of the experts, right? Because I'd lost a child, so I knew about child loss. And what I very quickly realized was in some ways how little I knew. Yes, I knew that pain, but on the other hand, no one ever walked up to me as the mother of a child who died of brain cancer and said, you know, why didn't you do more? Why didn't you stop this? Right? Whereas I started meeting people who'd lost children to suicide or mental illness or overdose who were getting that question, much to my horror, because I didn't know, right? I didn't know what I didn't know. And so a lot of this is about learning from other people. So it's educating our leaders, educating the people that we work with. But also the other piece of this is actually educating them, if you will, on what to do. Because so much of what's written and talked about with grief and loss in the workplace is you need to do it. Here's why you should do it, right? We need to do it as humans because it's the right thing to do. We need to do it for the bottom line as organizations. And you get folks to a point where they say, okay, this makes sense. I understand, you know, Tim has lost a child. I need to be supportive, but what do I do? And that's the piece that's so often missing is the how. How do I actually support Tim? And that was a big reason why I wrote the book was because I felt like that was a missing piece. And it's something that Tim and I have talked a lot about, right? It's that we don't know how to do most things until somebody teaches us. And so I think it's that. I think finally too, it's also really connecting with the folks within an organization who have that experience and then who can mentor and coach other people and support the folks who are grieving. And I think you build it, you know, kind of like you said, Tim, grassroots, organically, with the folks who understand why it's important and how to do it and can model that very brave work of sitting down and saying, you know, Tim, I heard you lost your son. You know, will you tell me about him? How are you doing? What can I do to make today easier at work this week, et cetera? And I think that's really where the work is.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you were saying reminded me after we started Wrenched Hearts, I kind of became the expert on grieving employees at Delta. And one of the wisest leaders, he was a manager in a shop, had an employee who lost a child. And before that employee came back to work, they called me and they said, hey, would you come in and talk to our team? Tell us how we should welcome him back to work, how we should protect them, how we should, you know, be around this employee. And, you know, we posted things on our internal site at Delta for Wrenched Hearts on these are the things that you shouldn't say. These are the things that you should say. And like you said, until you've been there, until you've learned that this is how people need to be treated, you really don't know. And I was horrified at some of the things I had said to people who had a loss right before I lost Jason. Something as simple as he's in a better place. I remember someone saying that to me at the funeral, right? And I thought, better place. What better place is there than here with his daddy, right? And you just don't think about the platitudes that we use all the time, how hurtful they can be. And I was just so impressed that a leader said, come talk to my team, tell us how to bring them back in without re-injuring them. And that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because the other thing too that I think happens, Tim, and I'd be curious to know what you think about this, is what I find so often is that it is not that people are unwilling to be supportive. They are scared, right? Because we've all had that experience. I had that experience maybe a month ago where I was talking to a prospective client and she was sharing that she had just she had just lost her mother. And I said, without even pausing to find out a bit more, oh, I'm so sorry. And I looked at her face and I realized, oh, this was a really complicated loss. This was not just that sort of more purity of, I've lost my mom. I'm really sad. And she said, well, it's not that simple. And I thought, of course it's not. But we do that, right? We jump in to say the thing that we think is the right thing. And if I had paused longer, I think she probably would have given me some clues that it was a mixed loss of some sort. And it's not that I would have asked about it, but I would have said something different, right? But as you and I know, Tim, so much is intention, right? We do our best, we say the thing, and then we learn each time, to get better about it. One
Yeah.
of the things I want to go back to wrenched hearts meetings for just 1 minute, though, because there's one burning question that I just want to ask you about it. So I've met a lot of folks, particularly saltwater connected, who have really had, even by law standards, horrific losses, right? Where they've lost more than one child, or they've lost it. I just met someone yesterday who has lost a child and no, I'm sorry, she lost her husband, and 40 days later, she lost her 6-year-old child. And so I'm imagining that you get a real blend of folks, right, at Wrench Hearts. And so if for the ones who come in who are particularly devastated, how do you encourage them to come, and how do you keep them in the room? If not keep them in the room, that sounds bad, but how do you make it into a safe place for them so they want to stay in the room when they come to your meetings? Because I imagine you get the same kind of gamut of loss, right?
Absolutely. We've had members who've lost multiple children at the same time. We've had members who've lost multiple children over time. We've had overdose. We've had murder. All these things, right, that create different emotions, different feelings, and so probably the most important thing was a comfort level. Like when they do come to the meeting, we make sure we tell them right away, we're going to share stories. If you want to talk, talk. If you don't want to talk, just sit and listen. And there's no pressure. There's no expectation that especially a parent who has a recent loss is going to be comfortable with coming in and just start talking to people they don't know. And I think that freeing of I can just sit here and listen. One of the things that we did, we had a wonderful, wonderful lady who she ran a catering business. And when she heard what we were doing, she would cater our meetings once a month, free of charge. And what I found out is when people sit and eat together, there's kind of that connection, right? That's easy. And if you have food in front of you, you can take a bite so no one asks you a question. It's kind of a safety net, if you will. One of the first people that came into our first meeting, and he's okay with me sharing his story and his name. His name was John Fleet. He had 3 boys, and he was driving them in his vehicle, and a semi truck changed lanes, clipped the back of his car, and flipped him down the interstate. And when everything stopped, 2 of his boys were not in the car. They were on the interstate and they were gone. And it happened in 1999. Now, we started our first meeting in 2013. And when he came to that meeting, he was broken. He was angry. Life for him had just stopped. And he told me then, he said, I've tried everything. I've tried alcohol. I've tried therapy. I've tried all these things. And within a year, of him coming to our monthly meetings, I started to see a change in John. John started helping other people. And I remember telling him one time, when you start helping other people, you're going to help yourself. And he told me that actually made him mad. He said, I didn't come here to help people. I came here to get help. Well, after about a year, he told me, helping people has helped me. And he wound up eventually being president of Wrenched Hearts, leading the group for probably 2 years. And he became the spokesperson for who we are. I think that's the most important thing, is giving people that safe space. And when I say safe, I mean, you don't expect anything of them. You give them what you can give them and let them lean in when they're ready to lean in.
Yeah. Well, I think what's so beautiful about that, Tim, is that you allow the folks who are grieving to be the experts, right? Because they're the ones who know what they need. And I think about your question about, what do you do in a workplace where there isn't anything, sort of set up? It's not necessarily, they don't really have an approach to this. Is it one of the things I think it's important to say is that it's about allowing the people in your organization who are grieving to be the experts and to say what they need. And I don't mean make demands, but I mean say about what's hard, say when they need help. And what I found is that when we make that shift, even when we're supporting somebody one-on-one, all of a sudden it takes the pressure off us, right? Because you and I don't have to fix the situation. We're turning to the person who can tell us what would make things easier. So like in the case of Wrenched Hearts, folks just coming and sitting and listening is what they needed. Imagine how different it would have been if you'd said, no, no, we need you up front and we need you to stand up and introduce yourself and jump right in, and had done that instead. I mean, it's so beautiful that you allow them to say what they need, essentially. And that might be silence. That might be sitting quietly by themselves as they get used to being there.
Absolutely. And I think too, at the beginning, it's uncomfortable and people do need to just be silent. They need to just hear that people around them are experiencing the same hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sandy, if you don't mind muting, we're getting a little bit of what's happening in your background.
So, what do you think, Margo, that other than what I've done, what can an employee do if you were consulting? What can an employee do if their manager isn't supportive, right? If their manager says, all right, I'm sorry, you lost your child, you have 3 days bereavement leave, then you're going to be back to work and we're not going to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, it's such a hard question. It really is. I was thinking about this earlier in the week. I did a workshop for a group of parents who'd lost their children to brain cancer. And one of the women was talking about her team and her boss not being supportive. And she said the hardest thing about that is that it falls to me as the grieving mother and employee to help myself. And I think that's the hardest thing about that situation in many ways is when you don't get the support you need, you're really in no condition to do that much about it in some ways. I think that one of the things that can help is if you're able to find someone else within the team or the organization, that might be HR, that might be a peer of your manager, that might be someone else on the team who could go have a conversation with that person and help them ideally to understand a bit more about what might be happening. And sometimes that actually isn't about the human element of this, as in we need to step up and do the right thing. It might be, Tim is a valued employee. And if we don't support him through this really horrible thing that's happened, we might lose him. And I hate the fact that sometimes we have to approach it that way, but sometimes for a boss that's really not willing to understand or be empathetic, that may be the right approach. And the person who's had the loss is not in a position to do that. So I think that can be a peer-to-peer conversation. I think it can be HR if your organization is large enough and equipped in the right way to do that. I think in the other thing that I hear too is that sometimes it's the upfront. And in that case, there's limited things you can do. And sometimes those are the folks who decide sometimes in short order, sometimes after a period of time, that they are not going to go back to that organization, or they're going to leave that organization, because there are certain things I think you just can't fix. And as I think all of you know on this call, right, we don't really leave organizations, we leave managers. They are because when that becomes untenable, we might switch to a different role in the organization and a different boss, but we leave our manager in that case. I think as time goes on and we get a bit emotionally stronger and better able to have conversations, I think there is this opportunity to then go and actually have a conversation with your manager and share a bit about what you're experiencing and why it's challenging. And really almost try to understand, get curious about why it's happening and why this leader is behaving the way he or she is. But again, that takes a lot of emotional fortitude that we don't have in those early days. So I think in the early days, it's about getting help from someone else to go talk to that leader. And then perhaps also, being really clear about what you can and can't do and what you're willing to do and not willing to do. And finding a way, if you can, to ask for those things that are essential to your being able to stay at work. So do we have questions, Tim, that folks are...
I was just reading the latest comment.
Oh, that's so interesting, Sylvia, that COVID had such an impact. That's really beautiful because it's interesting because that it's done that, and that it sounds like it's endured too.
Yeah. And honestly, I think companies have wised up a little bit. The Employee Assistance Program, or EAP, that used to be a really bad word for most employees. They did not want to have to call EAP because typically it didn't work out very well. And one of the things that I think that Wrenched Hearts brought to Delta and to our employee assistance program was reality, right? Many of our Wrenched Hearts employees had gone to EAP. They had, were seeking counsel, and they got counsel from someone who didn't know anything about grief. They didn't know anything about child loss. Somebody might have a degree in counseling, but unless they really know what you've been through, they really can't give you what someone who's been through where you are can give you. And like I said earlier, for especially Delta Airlines, it cost them zero, and the benefit back was huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sylvia, I want to apologize. I called you Sylvia instead of Sylvie. And I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing. It's totally fine if you don't. But I would love to know why you saw this shift after COVID and why you think it's sustained after COVID.
Well, yes, thank you. It's very funny because I'm a counselor in the place where you wouldn't have a counselor. I work for the federal government in Canada, and we do have employment assistance program, but I don't work for the employment assistance program. I work in another field. So when COVID started, you know how we all got like to turn on a dime in a matter of 24 hours. We had to turn, and we had to work from our home. And in our case, where we are, most people who work from home had issues at the beginning because one, husbands and wives are all together on the same day with the kids all together, and you all know what that means, right? We love your husband, we love your kids, but when you're 24 hours a day together, it can be a little difficult, right? So the federal government is a very big employer where I am. I'm in the capital, very big employer. So they tried a lot to make things easier for, their employees. And little by little, they realized that a lot of people were not comfortable talking to somebody at the employee assistance program. For example, in my case, and I don't mind sharing this, when my husband passed away, I was told by my previous employer, who was the university, to go and talk to somebody at the employment assistance program. Well, I'm a counselor. What do you think that they do? I know exactly what they're doing because I know the strategies, I know the skills that they're employing, I know all that. So I kept in my mind thinking, okay, this is what she's doing. Okay, this is what she's doing. Okay, I can do that by myself. I don't need this. And I had all the courses and the training to do this. So what happens, I think, in the government, a lot of people starting with the top directors, managers talked about their own mental health issues, their own losses.
Mhm.
And that opened up people, employees, to feel comfortable, because if your director, your manager is talking publicly about their loss, whatever it is,
Mhm.
whatever they're grieving, you feel comfortable saying, okay, so it's an okay topic. I can talk about that. So it's been like, just in our little group, every Thursday, we have a day, an hour, just to talk about what's happening at work. How do we feel? If we feel like it, you don't have to go. If we feel like it. So I think COVID has had that. And I hear other organizations as well are doing this as well. I find that it's been, in my case, COVID has been just great. It's been, I mean, I'm not saying it's been good for a lot of people. I think we're talking about bereavement, we're talking about loss, we're talking about this. It's opened up a lot of safe spaces, like I said, at work, and even, talking to people who have experienced losses during COVID, even about it, it's easier to talk about that.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's such a beautiful thing to learn from that experience and get better as a result.
I would love to hear Sheila's story about the space, if she's willing.
And yes, just give me a second and I get my video on. Yes, hello. Yes, greetings from The Hague, the Netherlands. Yes, so the space, I work for a very big international organization, and on international crimes, we investigate international crimes. I'm an international criminal investigator, so which is very demanding and very taxing if you know what's going on in Israel now. So, but anyway, so I went through a period of loss. In 2016, I lost my father. 2017, my grandfather. 2018, my grandmother. My father died when I was 8. So these are all people who raised me and took care of me and saw me through education, getting married, everything. So then it was also a very busy time of the case I was handling at the time. So with all of these, I'm very passionate about my work. So instead of, I think consciously or subconsciously, I decided that with all this that is happening in my life, everything is collapsing. I'm going to focus on my work. I'm going to give everything. Something has to work. Something has to be good. My children have to be good. My work has to be excellent. So I just did that. I didn't give myself time to grieve. I did not receive the support in the office. Everybody just told me, she's a go-getter. She's always just on the field. She's really strong. You're such a strong person. We're so proud of you. You're amazing. How you just bounce back. Well, eventually, at some point, when the case was already at trial stage, I went through a burnout. I remember just feeling so tired, and I was like, this is not me. And then everything just collapsed around me. My doctor told me, you're way past a burnout, so you need to take time off. But in that period, no one from the office, other than human resources, reaching out to do administrative work to approve the sick leave and all of that. That was okay. You need to see a therapist, and that was it. No one reached out from the office to check how are you doing, what's happening. And of course, I have friends from office, but from the managers, from people who I've seen all the work I've done over the years, I thought, the human element to just care a bit, and nobody did that. The only time it was close to the end of the sick leave that they reached out and they said, yeah, we'd like to let you know that you only have so many days of paid leave, sick leave left. And during this period, during the period as I was going through this, to help myself really stay, I joined the Institute of Modern Applied Psychology, Ecology, and I did a lot of training on emotional intelligence and counseling and all of this, because I wanted to understand what I was going through, what I was experiencing, because just sitting and talking with a therapist wasn't really getting me there. So I did a lot of these trainings, and they helped me a lot to really, first of all, understand myself, understand what I was experiencing, and then to get the self-awareness, but then also to start having the awareness to see how others could experience it, and the kind of empathy and understanding that you need. So then I realized in this period with all of this, I said, you know, what I would have really loved in this period. It's okay. They can respect my privacy, but these are the people I spend 8 to 10, I don't know, some long hours with. I've spent the better days of my life working. When I'm on missions in the field, sometimes it's 3 weeks at a time. So these are the people I spend time with. These are the people who know, yes, I have my family, but I would have expected, I hoped that you would see, understand, and know that, you know, she's going through this. We will not be invading her privacy if we just reached out and say, Sheila, how are you doing? Would you like to have a chat? Would you like to have a coffee? You know, would you like to talk about your grandmother? Because we talked a lot about your grandparents with us. We've heard so much about what they've done, how they raised you, and we've seen that had element in who you are. To just share with me. So moving forward from that, and all the trainings are done, and I'd met such amazing people with amazing experiences doing these courses. Most of them came from their own personal experiences, and it led them to this journey to seek out, to find out, to see how to relate with people, how to be a human being. And to just, so from that, I came back to the office. I don't want to see others go through what I went through. I'll start small. So I joined the Staff Union Council. I said, chairperson health, I would like to be chairperson health and welfare. My focus will be on mental health. I want to give back to my colleagues what I would have hoped to receive from the organization, because I see the high rate of burnout, the depression, the disillusionment, the loss of interest. It's costing the organization a lot, but more importantly, it's costing families relationships, because if a staff member cannot function home on a burnout, they cannot be there for their families. It's like they've given a lot of energy here and time here. Suddenly, they cannot fit that space, and you give them back to their family members. We're
Yeah.
like, what do we do with this person? So that's why I really I like the space, because in the space, sometimes just what I realized is just a lot of times a person just needs the space to come, and some just rant and some just break down, but they see the element that this person sees me, this person feels me, I'm a human being, my dignity is recognized here, I'm a dignified human being, I'm appreciated, I'm valued beyond just my contribution, I am seen. So people break down. Sometimes I have to ask the staff counselor to come and make an intervention and say, this person really needs more support. And then I collaborate with people from the institute, and I invite them to do trainings and to help. I just want to create this emotionally aware and humane environment in our. It's small. It's not a lot of work. It's not easy work. I've also been able to identify colleagues who have done Reiki, who have different trainings, and they're willing to give that, and they're passionate about the welfare of others. So they're doing that. And I can see the reason in the organization, because to really support a human being requires intentionality, requires dedication, requires time. It's not just about bringing other consultants to come in, and then you do a few meetings, and then you draft a report, and then you do a few posters which end up on the shelf, and then you move on. You've ticked a box. Just requires real engagement. So yes.
That's amazing, Sheila. And honestly, it sounds like Wrenched Hearts. It sounds a lot like Saltwater. And you're absolutely right. It's intentional. It requires a lot of work. But people are healed, and people begin to get past the grief, the PSTD, the burnout, all those things. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah, that was amazing. And I loved what you said, Daddy, you know, you want to be seen, right? And acknowledged. And that power of just having somebody see that who understands it too is really lovely. And I think that's also part of this mythology, right? Of grief in the workplace is expensive. No, it really isn't. But it's about making time. And as you said, Sheila, being intentional, right? And allowing folks the space to come together. But it isn't something that costs a lot of money. And I do think there's some mythology around that too. Daniel asked about the recording. No, Daniel, this thing will get posted. I don't know if it will be until after all of the talks, the firesides happen or not, but it will. Oh, there's John. Who can answer that question.
Hi, everybody. Yes, so when the whole conference is finished, we'll be posting all of the recordings on YouTube, and they'll also be posted on the WI website. And we'll send out correspondence to everybody who registered to let them know and to give you all the links. So it'll all be available. Yeah.
Great. I know we're getting I just put my email in the chat, and if there are any questions that I can answer or any, resources, anything like that, please reach out anytime. I'm happy to connect about whatever you would like. And I saw Tim put his in there as well.
Yeah, like we said, I may be retired. Golf is my number one thing, right? Golf, my wife, my dog. But if you have questions specifically for me, especially about wrenched hearts or child loss, I'm happy to reply. Just know I might be on the golf course a few days a week.
Keep working on that handicap, Tim. Well, thank you, everybody. Beautiful event. Such an incredibly important topic. It's Tim and Mo, you've experienced something I hope I never have to experience. But I am so grateful that you're out there flying the flag, doing the work, and supporting people who are going through, one of the most terrible tragedies, and supporting them through that challenge. So thank you for bringing this topic to such a beautiful platform. Thank you, everybody who's been part of it and tuned in and supporting the work that we're doing, trying to make workplaces better for everybody. So wishing you all well. Thank you very much again, Margo and Tim. And please, everybody, take care out there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today.